There are an incredible number of fantastic games for the Game Boy, Game Boy Color, and Game Boy Advance. I love how these games play within the limitations of these systems and are able to do so much with them. Today, let's look at 15 awesome games for the Game Boy, Game Boy Color, and Game Boy Advance. Samurai Kid. Samurai Kid is a great puzzle platformer with combat elements. You have 3 weapons you can switch between. A sword that slashes and helps you jump higher. A whip thing that turns some enemies into blocks that can be pushed. This thing also seems to be some sort of beverage holder since you drink out of it in one of your idle animations. And a fan that charms enemies and makes them follow you. You also have some special moves if you hold down the attack button for any of these weapons. Each section is a puzzle room where you have to figure out how to escape and move forward. The music is alright, but it can get a bit repetitive, but that's the case with a number of Game Boy games. The graphics for this one are absolutely fantastic for the Game Boy Color. Stylish and cool. That's because this game was released in 2001, only in Japan. While you could play this in Japanese without issue, there's a great English translation available. Mole Mania! Mole Mania is a puzzle game with some real talent behind it, including Miyamoto himself, of Zelda, Mario, and Pikmin fame. He was a producer on the project. It's one of those puzzlers where you push stuff around to get from A to B. You can dive underground and dig around in an underground world. The holes you make in the earth can also be used to your advantage to move things about. This game is a lot of fun, and one of a number of puzzlers on this list. Speaking of puzzlers, Inky and the Alien Aquarium. This one's for the GBA. This is an indie puzzler that I found to be a little tricky. If you make a wrong move, you often have to start back at the start of that particular puzzle. But if you're good at puzzler games, the solutions are often right in front of you with some logic. It's worth mentioning that not every puzzle is solvable from the angle that you might enter it. So you have to adventure around to find the right avenue to go down. You play as an octopus, so I'm already on board. Really not enough games out there starting with adorable little octopi. The story is about aliens kidnapping sea creatures and putting them in these mazes. It's a charming game that will be frustrating to some, but fun for others. Puyo Pop. I love Puyo Puyo, and this may be my favorite version. It has all the classic chibi animated charm of the original Puyo Puyo games, but with sleek design and cool added mechanics and challenges. The single-player campaign is a joy to play, even if the dialogue is the usual predictable, silly, mindless blah 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 blah. It is difficult to beat the single-player campaign due to a system of items you need to collect to progress forward. Despite that, this is an addictive, fun game that I enjoyed every moment of. You can also, of course, play head-to-head 2-player. This would require a link cable on original hardware. Cold Nights. Cold Nights is a survival game where, after a plane crashes, you need to survive in a snowy, cold, abandoned area where there are some cabins and signs that people have been there in the past. Manage resources and try to keep well fed. The game has no music, but to be honest, it doesn't really harm the feeling and perhaps makes it better. It definitely could use some wintry sound effects, but it's an interesting indie title. Donkey Kong Land 2. There are a lot of fun Donkey Kong Country series ports on the Game Boy and Game Boy Advance. Some are more fun and memorable than others. I'm not sure if this is the best one, but I love it. I own the Japanese version of this cart, and it's a beautiful color between orange, gold, and banana. Like Donkey Kong Country 2 on the SNES, you can change between Diddy Kong and Dixie Kong. Diddy does his cartwheel roll attack, and Dixie can fly like a helicopter through the air and attack with her ponytail. The music and sprites are fun and lighthearted. It feels like a charming demake of the SNES and GBA compatriots. I have a certain fondness for demakes when there's love and care put into them. And that's definitely the case here. It's not a hard game, but it's a fun one. Shining Force: Resurrection of the Dark Dragon. This is a remake of the original Shining Force game for the Genesis and Mega Drive. Shining Force is a strategy RPG where you can collect teammates and level them up. Its story is not out of this world. It's detailed and engaging enough, though. The combat system is great. It's fun to play these epic battles. Most of your characters can level up to the point where they change in a way that's kind of similar to a Pokemon evolution. This GBA version has more characters and lower difficulty compared to the original Genesis game. It makes several other changes, including new weapons, card collecting, a new palette, and a better translation, among other things. This remake is not objectively better or worse than the original, it's just different. "2048 Advance." Here, the puzzle game 2048 is ported to the GBA. It's a game where you combine matching numbers by pressing up, down, and left and right on the D-pad. With each move, a number is added to the field, usually 2. And you need to conglomerate the tiles into one larger number, which can get progressively tougher. Granted, you can get a long way by just pressing the D-pad buttons in a circular motion, but eventually you get stuck. So it appears to me it's best to use strategy after some circular spamming of the D-pad. This game is strangely addictive and fun. It taps into some primitive part of the brain. It also has extremely simple, but somehow satisfying sounds and visuals. Goodboy Galaxy. Some GBA modern indie games are short and simple. This is a full game, with fantastic art that would have been a killer experience even if it came out at the height of GBA's popularity, and during its original, strong game library. You play as a space dog that crashes his ship on a planet next to an alien observatory. The game is sort of like a Metroidvania in some aspects, backtracking and exploration-wise especially. There are these gates you have to walk through that take away one of your abilities, and these add additional challenge during the levels. Different planets you visit have different ecosystems and environments. The game itself is simple jumping and shooting and puzzles, but it's immaculately done. Also, throughout the game, you can collect friendship cards and become more popular. You meet a lot of simple, quirky characters along the way. An absolute banger. Bitteroot. Bitteroot is a short horror adventure game. This one is the classic story of a broken down car and a creepy mansion in the middle of nowhere. It's not as wacky as the Rocky Horror Picture Show, but it's kind of that basic story. Weird world inside an inexplicable mansion. You will be trying to understand what's going on in this weird mansion by exploring its strange, empty recesses. There are creatures and corpses. It's easy to pick up and has a simple and stylish art style. Definitely less creepy than some other horror indie games for the Game Boy, like the game Neighbor, and much less startling than the jump scares in the indie version of the game Scary Maze for the Game Boy. A lovely horror experience. How about another horror game? The Melting Apartment. This one is a weird, creepy, and uncomfortable feeling detective horror game. It's a very short experience. The game's premise is an investigation of a missing girl. You're exploring an apartment complex looking for clues, but it's immediately obvious that this isn't a normal apartment complex. It's not the most disturbing horror game I've ever seen, but it leaves you feeling kind of weird. The art is really good and it feels like you're navigating through a nightmare, in the point-and-click adventure style. The dirty bathroom, creepy characters, and surrealism do feel like they're pulled directly from a bad dream. Short and weird, but well done. When making this list, there were a lot of Sonic games to choose from. For now, I just had to narrow it down to one. I mean, there are a lot of them here, but I had to choose one. So in the end, I went with Sonic Advance 2. Sonic Advance 1 and 3 are good, but I like the look of this one. To be honest, this is a pretty mindless game. It's not particularly hard, and early stages flow by easily. But the sounds and the visuals are great, and it's a fun mental break. Just turn off your brain. The version here is a hacked version with a number of improvements to the game. Super Mario Land 2, 6 gold coins. Super Mario Land 2 is a little offbeat. It's special. It feels a little different than the other Mario games. But it's definitely Mario. There are some cool mechanics, typical things like Fireball, but also some stuff that's unique to this game, like a radish that gives you rabbit ears and allows you to float. Not that that's too out of character for a Mario game. It has a great variety of stages and enemies that live in their own little worlds, like going inside a beehive and fighting bees and larvae and things like that. This is a great game. Here it is with a color mod that really makes the game pop. If you haven't played this one, give it a chance because you're in for a real treat. I like the charm of the original Mario Land and understand that it has nostalgia for some. But this is the superior game of the two in my opinion. 5 minutes until goodbye. As the name implies, this is a short one. The game has a 5-minute timer and takes place at a train station. It's not perfectly written, but it's a beautiful emotional experience. It's like a particularly touching poem that gets a feeling that is common but hard to describe. It's sad, but definitely worth the time to experience. It may seem dumb to some, and it may hit others with some real deep feelings. I thought it was fantastic and touching. I won't spoil it here by describing too much. Metroid II. There is something so satisfying about moving through Metroid II. It's not a super complex game, but it's got a great extraterrestrial vibe that fits perfectly with the Metroid series. It gets right into the gameplay, without all the extended cutscenes of modern-day games. This is a color modification that makes the game feel somewhat kinda more modern than the original. Metroid Fusion and Zero Mission are some of my favorite GBA games, but in my opinion, this classic Game Boy game is special. Thanks for tuning in to my list of 15 awesome Game Boy, Game Boy Color, and Game Boy Advance games. I appreciate you stopping by.